Hello, this is Mark Nelson. What you're about to see is a series of concept drawings and a little demonstration on how I build my concept drawings for my comic book Thunder Hunters. Birds are so much fun to draw, you needed our fine feathered friends number one. Hi, Mark Nelson here again, and what we're going to do is play with a little of our avian friends. So here's some little kind of concept ideas or things that I might start when I'm thinking of designing birds for the Thunder Hunters comic. Now, when you think about a bird, it can have all different kinds of shapes and forms, the bill especially. So when you think of something very simple like an ibis, you're going to have a long curved bill because these guys are filter feeders. And they're going to do something like that. The hummingbird is going to have a long, straighter bill because his little bill has to go deep into that plant to get the nectar. So, when you play with a longer bill, that's going to be something like that. The birds I enjoy, the toucans, have this big sort of wonderful flat bill that is going to have little serrations along here because they're fruit eaters. You got the raptors, which are going to come in, and then they're going to have a shorter bill that's going to come to a point for ripping and tearing. You're going to have the parrots, which will have a bill that's going to curve down maybe a little bit more, and a heavier secondary jaw here because their jaws work back and forth. You actually have a bird called the gross bill, where the point actually comes across one side and crosses up here on another. So what can you do? How can you have some fun? So let's move these little guys up and let's just do a couple little simple head shapes. Now, something that I really do love, and I think, I mentioned the hornbills and the toucans. So let's come in here once and think about how we can take one. We'll give the skull shape. You got your little zygomatic arch. You're going to have your lower jaw. But what I like to do is just over-exaggerate some of these things a little bit more. Because after all, you're creating a world and, you can say it's going to happen like this. So we came in, I'm creating sort of a bill shape. I've got the skull here. The back of the skull would be here. The neck come down at a slight angle. We've got something like that. Now again, the nasal passage might be a little guy up in here. But since we can do it, let's have some fun playing. So let's create, how big of an eye do you want to have? So I'm just going to create a little bit of a smaller eye. And then I'm going to sort of say, like sometimes with macaws and other parrots, let's just come in here and let's ask ourselves, can we put a few little wrinkles around that eye and give it sort of maybe a little bit of a fleshier open expanse that would be in here. And then as we start to come across and think about what's behind, let's come in and put a few little feathers and do that. And as that bill would come in, let's take that top bill, wrap that around into here. And now let's come in, and since we're playing with that whole armored thing, I'm just going to cut a little bit of this out here. Let's bring this up here. But since we can play a little bit more, let's just try something by even, creating something that could become almost a spike or a little bit of a horn coming out even on him. So he's a double hornbill in a sense. You could have something like that. And we'll just create that. Let's bring this down and bring that tip over. We'll just give him a softer thing. Lengthen that tip out a little bit more. And then I'm just going to create a little bit of a serrated edge coming back. Let's come in here. Now at the lower jaw, I can keep it very close. And then let's split right here where the lower jaw might be covered with the flesh. And it might start to have some of the feathers sticking out. So very simply, you can kind of see we can play very quickly and kind of have some fun. Now, do we want to put stripes on the bill? Do we want to put striations? What do you want to do? So like with a toucan, he might have something where you could play with the whole quality of a stripe or a striation coming across the bill. So let's put a little bit of that in just for fun. Let's accent the nostril, a little bit more. bring that in and come in here. Now I could put a few little lines just to indicate that this could feel a little bit more bony, and we'll bring this down in here. Now let's just say that these guys are intelligent and they, like us, go into body modification or go to get a tattoo or something like that. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to put a little piercing in him, and let's put a little bead coming up and kind of a little earring in there. And then maybe what he does or she does, we're going to have that, but let's just come in here and create a little bit of a feather or some kind of an accoutrement that, you know, you could say that these guys, you know, like with the American Indians and things like that, where you're sitting down and you're saying the chief would have a certain type of feather that would be respected. This guy could have a feather that could have a pattern. You could do a lot of different kinds of things. So let's put that in there. So all of a sudden, you can see if I came in and I said, okay, let's make this end a little bit. We'll come in and darken this up. I could deal with it in ink as a black and leave a little bit of a white line in here. And, you know, all of a sudden, he's or she is taking on a whole different kind of characteristic with what we've got going. So if we want to keep sort of a rounded bird eye, let's put a little highlight in here. Let's come in and create that. Create a little dark at the top. And all of a sudden, if I wanted to come in and just make this more of a black or a flat kind of color coming in here, I'm going to say I'm going to darken it a little bit. So that means we can darken up these feathers. Maybe leave a little white highlight for the rib in the middle coming in like that. And then we can push that silhouette and that quality of a flat black, and we can bring that down and let's create it as a pattern on the guy. So all of a sudden we could play with a black pattern that might come in as in terms of a feather, and we've got that. And then I could play with the quality of a white feather or a lighter feather that might come across in the chest. So since we have this here, let's pull this down. Let's add just a little bit of texture just to create a little different kind of feel in there. And we'll push that, and we'll push that. And all of a sudden, we have kind of a nice little bird head. Now, let's push this a different way. And let's just slide up here. And let's ask ourselves, you know, if we're going to make him or her more predatorial. So let's think about the whole idea of, you know, when you've got an owl, you're going to have a big eye, same thing with an eagle, but let's create a little bit of a heavier brow coming in here. Let's create an eye that's larger, an eye that's larger over here. Let's come down here in that center line, and let's create that drop of that kind of a raptor bill. You know, you can play with all different kinds of things that you want to make that thing feel a little more deadly and a little more dangerous. Bring that brow back across. And we'll just try and create that. So now all of a sudden we're starting to create a very different kind of feel for something like this. Now let's come in and just for the heck of it, let's just say that we'll make him predator, but let's just make this end of his bill feel a little bit more, for some reason, like an axe. So maybe the lower jaw might actually come in and do something like this. And it's not working quite as well. So let's get rid of that. We'll keep the long point for ripping, tearing. And then as we come in, we could start to think that maybe there's more serrations on the lower jaw. Let's move this guy in a little bit. We'll do something like this, and let's pull that a little bit longer. Now he's starting to look a little bit more like a terror bird or something within that kind of framework. So as we start designing our little avian friends here, sometimes it's kind of fun to think about what they do. Now this guy's eye is mounted on the side. This guy is mounting the eye in the front a little bit. Predatorial means that they're going to be hunting and they're going to be looking at things. So a predatorial eye, like on dogs and lions and that, are mounted to the front. because you're chasing the prey. You want to keep track of that prey. When you look at prey's eyes and you look at things like deer, antelope, cows, their eyes are mounted on the sides like this, more so you've got that whole thing that you can see a 360 degree. So let's do this. Let's actually create a little bit of a thicker nose here, and I'm just going to try something just for fun. Now, what would happen if for some reason this guy also had to crack heavy shells or something like that, so that their end of their bill had these kind of interesting spikes in them that would be used to crush things, and then they could pick it up and gobble it with their pointed ends, cut slash gulp. We'll bring this down a little bit so that comes out. Let's bring again the lower jaw like we did here, coming across. And just to make it feel structurally a little bit sounder, I'll add that, and let's add a little bit of a weight in here. And then if we give them a little bit of a crop, that might be coming down. And, let's keep this nice and smooth. So this is aerodynamic, but what we can play with is the whole characteristic of, some of these feathers that might, like on a cockatiel, lie down, but can stand up when they are displaying or when they're fighting or when they're doing different things like that. So again, as you start to think about some of these things, it's always fun to ask yourself, how many different kinds of birds do you know? How many different kinds of, even dogs that you can think about? And they all have unique shapes and they all have unique characteristics. Vultures and that don't have a lot of feathers on their head because they're sticking into carrion and they don't want things stuck on them. So they'll have that smooth quality that can be rinsed off, washed off, shaken off, however you want to look at it. So we're just going to move that jaw down a little bit more. And once again, let's just come in here. We're going to keep those a little bit blunter just so that they're, he again wouldn't have things sticking on them. That would be more like a mashing, how you would pound your meat and make it a little more tender with a meat pulverizer if you're a chef and cooking. So, okay, and then we can come in, we'll create some feathers in here. We'll create a lower feel for that feather, wrapping down in here, create another layer, and then the big ones are going to come up. And we're going to have something that starts to do this on the old birderino. And I'm just going to put some little skin spots or things. So once again, I might keep the eye a little bit more open and create that kind of a feel. So now you can start to see, if I accent the shadow on the brow a little bit, you can make them look a little more angry, a little more predatorial. Let's put a little bit of a dark here. Let's come around and let's create a little bit of a dark around the eye. So again, giving them a different kind of masked feel, pushing that kind of thing a little bit more. Once again, since bills and that can be a little bit like fingernails, we can add a few little texture spots and do something like this. And you can see all this is starting to take on a different kind of feel. Now, once again, as we talk about this, let's just come in here. I'm going to get rid of that line. And I'm going to create a little bit of a bump here, create a little shadow underneath, create a little shadow underneath that, a little shadow, so that maybe we could even, put one up here. So now that kind of unifies that. Now, you can play with the whole attitude. You want this as a dark band, this is a light band. Do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? Or you just want to leave it alone so that you can come in later with color. So let's add just a few little tiny things that could become like a pin feather sticking out. And we've got that kind of a characteristic going. How is his neck going to be mounted, which might be a little more like this versus the one that's going to be a little bit at a softer angle, something like that. So now let's take and add like if you think of a cockatiel or some of that, they're going to have sometimes spots on them. They're going to have different things. So as those feathers come in, you know, they can start to take on a different kind of characteristic. How do you want the feathers to lie on the body? So I'm going to put some little short feathers up in the front here. We'll build that guy up a little bit more. And now we need to sit down and think about the whole iris and the eye and what you want to do, and the whole idea of some sort of a telescoping hole or something like that. So I'm just going to open up the iris here. But what I'm going to do is, again, since I can play, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a color or a pattern. That means that maybe as we see this guy, he's going to have a black iris, and he's going to have this star-like shape, so he's now become the star-eyed hawk. Now, I could do one of two things. I could make this dark, or I could make this dark. What the hey? Let's try something here. And if I came in and I just said, this is also going to be darkened here, so what we see is a big eye, but we're just going to see that little ring. And as he would get smaller or come in, you would just have that little tiny ring around that sort of object in that dark hole. So that can be kind of a nice little thing that would become very, very, again, a little bit more evil looking, a little bit more mysterious, however you want to use it. So all of a sudden, you can see very quickly, we've gone to two different birds here. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much. And if you would like to see more, please leave a comment, click like, or share below. I'm Mark Nelson. If you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe or follow button, and I'll see you next time.